The joint account had been open since I was 11 years old. My mother set it up so she could deposit my allowance without driving to the bank. 22 years later, I forgot it existed. My sister didn't. I found out on the Tuesday morning, standing in the parking lot of my office building, still holding my coffee, phone pressed to my ear while a woman from the bank read me a list of transactions I didn't recognize. Withdrawals. 17 of them, spread across 9 weeks. The smallest was $800. The largest was $4,200. All of them added up to $22,340. I asked her to repeat the total. She did. I didn't cry. I didn't drop my coffee. I just stood there in the cold and said, "Thank you. I'll call you back." Then I sat in my car for 20 minutes and did the math in my head over and over again, hoping it would come out different. It never did. That money was 3 years of my life. I'm 29. I work as a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus. The pay is decent, not exciting, and I share a one-bedroom apartment with a cat named Biscuit, who costs more than I'd like to admit. I had been saving for a down payment on a house since I was 26. Not a big house, just something with a yard, a place that was mine. I transferred $200 from every paycheck into that account, plus any overtime, plus a small inheritance from my grandmother that I refused to spend on anything else. I called it my someday account. By September, someday was almost here. I had a realtor. I had a pre-approval letter sitting in my email. I was 2 months away from being ready to make an offer. And then my sister needed a new chapter, and she decided mine would fund it. My sister is 26. Her name is Ivy, and she has always been the version of us that people remember. She was the one who got voted homecoming queen and actually cried when she won, the kind of tears that made everyone around her tear up too. She was the one our father called his little light, which I used to think was sweet until I got older and started noticing what happened when the light wasn't on me. Our parents aren't bad people. I want to say that plainly before I say anything else. They worked hard, loved us both, and genuinely believed they were being fair. But somewhere along the way, fair became something else. When I was 16 and wanted to take an SAT prep course, my dad said we didn't have the budget. When Ivy was 16 and wanted a vocal coach, he found the budget by the following week. When I graduated college, my gift was a card with $50 inside. When Ivy graduated, she got a trip to Florida. Nobody said anything about the gap because Ivy had a way of making her needs feel urgent and mine feel optional. I stopped explaining it to myself as jealousy a long time ago. It was just the way gravity worked in our family. Everything bent toward her, and I learned to build my life sideways. For most of my 20s, Ivy and I got along in the way that sisters do when they're not particularly close but share enough history to stay civil. She called me when she needed advice. I called her on birthdays. She had a habit of borrowing money and repaying it slowly, in awkward installments, always with a reason that made saying no feel cruel. I lent her $600 once when her car needed repairs. She paid back $200 and then moved away for a while, and the rest just dissolved. I let it go. It was $400. I told myself it didn't matter. I should have known $400 was just practice. In the spring, Ivy moved back to Columbus. She said she needed a fresh start. She was tired of the city she'd been living in, tired of the roommates, tired of a relationship that had quietly fallen apart. She stayed with our parents for a few weeks and then found a place of her own, which I was relieved about. I helped her move boxes. I bought her dinner. I told her I was glad she was home, and I meant it, mostly. What I didn't know was that she had already found the joint account. I found out later, much later, that she had come across the account number while going through some old documents at my parents' house. She remembered the account from when we were kids, knew her name was still technically on it as a secondary holder, and decided to check if it was still active. It was. All those years I forgot about it. The account sat open and idle, connected to a routing number I hadn't thought about since before I learned to drive. When Ivy logged in and saw the balance, she must have felt like she'd found something left out for her, like a door someone forgot to lock. The first withdrawal was $800 on a Thursday in July. I didn't notice because I wasn't watching that account. I watched my primary checking and my savings at a different bank. This old joint account was a ghost to me. She must have counted on that. The withdrawals came in every week or two, never round numbers. 1,352, 2,780 times, and 900.4,200. The bank flagged it eventually because of the frequency and sent an alert to an email address I hadn't used since college. By the time the fraud team called me directly, $22,000 was gone. I sat in my car and thought about everything that money had cost me. The overtime shifts where I ate vending machine dinners because I didn't have time to go anywhere real. The weekend I skipped my best friend's bachelorette trip because I was trying not to touch my savings. The winter I kept my heat at 62 degrees and wore 2 sweaters at home because utilities were cutting into my transfer amount. I thought about all of it, and I felt something cold and still settle into my chest. Not grief, not rage. Something quieter than both. I knew before I even asked. There was only one name on that account besides mine. I didn't call her that day. I called the bank and learned everything I needed to know about account security and what options I had. I called my realtor and told her I needed to pause our search for a few weeks due to a personal matter. She was kind about it. I sat with the information alone for 2 days because I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I let myself react. On the second day, I went through Ivy's Instagram. We weren't close enough for me to follow her, but her profile was public. In August, she had posted a photo of a new apartment. Nice place. Exposed brick, big windows, the kind of unit that rents for $1,600 minimum in that part of Columbus. In September, she posted a photo of a car. Cream-colored sedan, her leaning against the hood. Caption, new chapter, new wheels. In October, she posted herself at a rooftop restaurant downtown with 2 of her friends, glasses raised, everyone laughing. I looked at the dates, I looked at the withdrawal amounts. The new apartment deposit came 2 weeks after the first withdrawal. The car came the same week as the $4,200 transfer. I put my phone down. I looked at the wall for a while. Then I went to work because the quarterly report wasn't going to write itself. 3 days later, I drove to her apartment. I didn't warn her I was coming. She opened the door in a sweatshirt, visibly surprised, and immediately said I looked tired and should come in for tea. I sat down at her kitchen table and looked around the apartment. Nice furniture, new rug, a coffee machine that cost more than my rent. I told her I'd gotten a call from the bank. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there with the kettle in her hand. I told her about the withdrawals. I told her the total. I watched her face go through several things in quick succession. Surprise, then something that tried to look like confusion, then a particular kind of stillness that was the opposite of innocent. She set the kettle down. I was going to pay it back, she said. I nodded slowly. All $22,000. I needed it. I was in a really bad place and I couldn't ask Mom and Dad for more, and I didn't think you were watching that account. And I thought I had time to replace it before you noticed. You thought I wasn't watching, I said. She sat down. I know how it sounds. I'd been saving that money for 3 years, I said. I have a pre-approval letter. I have a realtor. I was 2 months away from making an offer on a house. Her eyes filled with tears. I'll give it back. I'll figure it out. I give it out. I promise. With what? I asked. Not unkindly, just a real question. She didn't have an answer. I told her I wouldn't be calling the police. I told her that was a decision I had made for my own reasons. Not because what she did was acceptable, but because I was not interested in burning the family down. I told her that the account had been flagged and the bank was investigating, and that I would be cooperating fully with that investigation. I told her she needed to tell her parents, not me telling them on her behalf, herself, in her own words, before the weekend. She started to cry harder. They're going to be devastated. Yes, I said, they are. I left her apartment and sat in my car and allowed myself 10 minutes of just feeling it. The loss of the house I'd been planning, the 3 years of discipline that had just been redirected into someone else's new chapter, the specific ache of realizing that the person who did this didn't even think of it as stealing, not really, because she had always understood my resources as available to her. After 10 minutes, I drove home. She called our parents that Friday evening. I know because my mother called me Saturday morning, voice thin and careful, asking if I could come for lunch. I said yes. I drove over and found my parents sitting at the kitchen table with the particular posture of people who have just received news they don't know what to do with. My dad spoke first. He asked if it was true. I told him the amount, the number of withdrawals, the dates. I slid a printed summary from the bank across the table. My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. My dad was quiet for a long time. He's not a man who shows anger easily. He tends to go very still first, the way water goes still right before it boils. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. He said, "Why didn't she come to us?" I didn't answer that. It wasn't really a question for me. Ivy was in the living room. She'd been asked to be there. My dad turned to her and asked her directly, "How much did you spend?" She told him. He asked what on. She told him. The apartment, the car, some furniture, nights out. She was ashamed. I could see it, the real kind, not the performed kind. Her hands were trembling slightly. He said, "You're going to sell the car." She blinked. "Dad, you're going to sell the car," he said again. "You're going to return everything returnable. Whatever you can't return, you'll sell. And you're going to pay your sister back every dollar. However long it takes. I can't sell the car, I need it to get to." "Then you'll figure out another way to get there," he said. "This isn't a negotiation." My mother looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry we didn't notice. I'm sorry we didn't close that account years ago." I hadn't expected that. I had prepared for a conversation where I would have to convince people, where I would have to argue for my own side. Hearing my mother apologize for something that wasn't even her fault undid something in me. I had to look down at the table for a moment. Ivy said, "I'll make it right. I swear I will." I said, "I know you believe that, but I'm not waiting on your belief. I need a written repayment plan by end of next week, signed, dated. Realistic numbers, not what you think I want to hear." She nodded. She was crying again. I said, "And the bank investigation is continuing. I'm not asking you to be okay with that. I'm telling you it's happening." Nobody argued with me. The weeks that followed were strange. Ivy sold the car in November, a private sale, less than she paid, but she did it. She moved to a cheaper apartment in January, a one-bedroom in a quieter neighborhood, without the exposed brick and the rooftop view. She got a second job at a coffee shop on weekends, and every 2 weeks she transferred money to an account I had opened specifically for this purpose. The first transfer was $300. It felt almost absurd against the total she owed, but she did it. Our parents started doing something I hadn't expected. They stopped reflexively defending her. When she called my mother upset about the second job being exhausting, my mother said, "I know it's hard. Keep going." That was it. No rescue. No, "I'll talk to your sister." Just keep going. In December, my mother called me separately and said she'd been thinking a lot about the way things had worked in our family. She didn't say it perfectly. It came out halting and imprecise, the way real apologies usually do. She said she thought she and my dad had made things harder for me than they should have without realizing it, that they had mistaken Ivy's loudness for greater need and my steadiness for not needing at all. She said she was sorry. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I wasn't ready to call it forgiven. Not entirely, but I understood something I hadn't before. The gap I'd spent my whole life stepping around hadn't been cruelty. It had been blindness. And blindness, once seen, can be corrected. I found my house in March. Different neighborhood than I'd originally planned, slightly smaller yard, but mine. The offer was accepted on a Wednesday. I called my realtor and she genuinely cheered. I sat on the floor of my current apartment with biscuit in my lap and looked at the acceptance email for a long time. The same way you look at something you almost had taken from you and then got back through sheer stubbornness. By that point, Ivy had repaid just over $8,000. Not enough to replace what I'd lost in time, but enough to understand she was serious. The bank investigation had concluded, and because she was a joint account holder technically, the legal path was murkier than I had hoped. I had made a decision not to pursue criminal charges, and I held to it. Not because what she did was okay. Because I decided what I wanted from this wasn't to see her punished. It was to see her different. She came to help me move in April. Just the two of us and a rented van, carrying boxes up a flight of stairs. She didn't make it sentimental. She didn't bring it up at all. She just worked. When we were done and I handed her a water bottle and we sat on the bare floor of my new living room, she said, "It's a really good house." "It is," I said. "I'm sorry it took this long to get here." I looked at her. She wasn't talking about the move. I said, "Me too." "She's still paying me back. It'll take another year, maybe more. We don't talk every week, but we talk more than we used to. And when we do, it feels different. Less performance, less management. More like two people who have finally decided to be honest with each other about who they are." I closed on the house on a Thursday in April. I signed my name 17 times and then walked into an empty kitchen and stood there for a moment in the silence before Biscuit was due to arrive. The floor was hardwood and the afternoon light came through the window at an angle that made the whole room glow. I thought about the 11-year-old version of me that opened a bank account with her mother. I thought about all the quiet years of building something steady while everything in my family bent the other way. I thought about the moment in a parking lot with a cup of coffee, hearing numbers that should have broken me. I stood in my kitchen and I was fine, not in the way of pretending, in the way of actually, genuinely fine. Because the loss had been real and the recovery had been real, and both of them had taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. You can love someone and stop catching them at the same time. You can be a sister without being a safety net. You can decide at any point that the person who gets protected first is you. I put my keys on the counter. I looked out the window at the yard. It was smaller than I'd originally planned. It was exactly enough. If you've ever had to choose between protecting yourself and keeping the peace in your family, I want to hear from you in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, hit like. It helps more than you know. I used to think being the steady one was just my personality. Now I think it was something I'd built out of necessity, the way you develop a callus where something keeps rubbing. For years I watched resources flow toward my sister and I told myself it didn't matter, that I was fine, that needing less was a kind of strength. What I didn't see was that staying quiet about what I needed had a cost too. Not just financially. It taught everyone around me, including Ivy, that I would absorb whatever came my way without breaking. And for a long time, that's exactly what I did. What happened with the joint account forced me to look at that pattern honestly. Ivy didn't steal from me because she was a monster. She stole from me because for her entire life, my resources had been treated as available. My overtime shifts, my skipped vacations, my heat kept at 62 degrees in January. None of that was visible to her. What was visible was that I always had enough and that I always managed. She made a choice that was wrong in every possible way, but she made it inside a story our family had been telling for decades. A story where her needs were urgent and mine were optional. The thing that changed everything wasn't the confrontation at her apartment. It wasn't even my dad telling her to sell the car. It was the moment my mother called me and said, haltingly and imperfectly, that she thought they had gotten something wrong, that they had mistaken my steadiness for not needing anything, that admission cost her something. I could hear it. And because it cost her something, I actually believed it. That's what real accountability looks like, I think. Not just the dramatic moments. I'd be crying at the kitchen table, the receipts laid out as evidence, the phone call to the bank. Those were necessary. But the quieter reckoning mattered more. The one where people who love each other sit with the discomfort of what they got wrong and don't rush to make it go away. Ivy is different now. Not perfectly different, not magically transformed. But she works. She transfers money every 2 weeks. She stopped performing her problems and started solving them. And the most meaningful thing to me isn't the repayment total on that spreadsheet. It's that she shows up differently. Less entitled, more honest, less certain that someone will catch her. That shift didn't come from me rescuing her. It came from me not rescuing her. I think about the version of me who would have covered for her, who would have called the bank and quietly resolved it, told our parents a softer version, lent her more money with a firm talk attached. That version of me existed. I had done smaller versions of it my whole life. And every time I did, I told both of us the same lie, that protecting her from consequences was love. It wasn't. It was just easier than the alternative. The house I closed on in April is not the house I originally planned for. It's smaller. The yard needs work. Some mornings I stand in the kitchen and feel the specific satisfaction of something that is entirely mine, paid for by years of discipline that no one took from me in the end. Not because the money was never taken, it was, but because I didn't let the taking be the last word. That's the thing nobody tells you about building something steady. It's not just what you accumulate, it's what you refuse to let go of. Your sense of what you deserve, your willingness to say out loud when something is wrong, your decision to stop being the person who absorbs everything quietly and start being the person who says, "This is where it ends." I stood in my kitchen the day I closed, and I felt for the first time in a long time completely clear. Not triumphant, just clear, like I had finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to hold. If you've ever been the steady one who got taken advantage of because of it, you know exactly what that feeling costs. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I hope you chose yourself. I hope you're still choosing it.